I would caution anybody jumping into that business without fully understanding the process of it. I leverage my experience because I've been a borrower, I've been a buyer, I've employed, the BRRRR strategy. So I know what that process looks like. Someone who's just getting into the lending space, if you don't really truly understand that process, it's easy to get burned. So if you are interested, I would encourage someone to partner up with someone that understands this space or someone with experience.
Right. Welcome back, passionate investing community. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Justin Pilakka, founder of fundmyclothes.com. Justin has over a decade of real estate experience and has worked across multiple investment strategies, including traditional buy and hold, BRRRR, Airbnb arbitrage, and wholesaling. He currently focuses on transactional lending, helping investors close more deals with speed and flexibility. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Hey, thanks, George, and appreciate you having me here.
All right, awesome. Well, I think that you're doing a lot of very exciting things from the standpoint of both investors trying to get their deals closed as well as lenders. As a lender myself, I like nothing more than hearing about new tips and tricks, ways to lend money and make sure that you end up holding on to that valuable principal. And you did mention, first of all, the transactional funding. So why don't you tell us some of the uses for that? So who comes to you for the transactional funding and what does the transaction look like?
Yeah. So transactional funding is actually a pretty interesting niche within the funding or lending world. So your typical clients are going to be the traditional wholesalers, someone that's looking to get a contract locked up and then assign it to an end buyer. A lot of these wholesalers that we work with, they tend to be new. They don't have the same liquidity available to them as some of the more established wholesalers. And so what they often need is just funding, for example, EMD. So when they're doing a lot of on-market deals and it's required to put EMD down, they're really scrambling to find where they can find those funds to put to title. And that's where we can come in and help. So, we support them in that way for EMD. And then, another scenario where wholesalers get kind of caught up is when a contract is, for example, unassignable. So they don't have the right to assign that contract to an end buyer. They can do something called a double close. So it's really in those situations where we can support wholesalers, and that's, it really gives them the ability to scale and close more deals.
Right.
We're
So is
also,
that based on different states, based on regulations? So some
yeah,
states you might be providing just the money to get the property under contract. Other cases. So for the double close, can you walk us through the transaction and help us understand exactly what happens?
yeah. So in a traditional double close, because that term gets used interchangeably for other strategies, but in a traditional double close or a simultaneous double close, you're purchasing the property and immediately selling it to an end buyer the same day. And there's different ways to structure that to provide security for the funder or lender. And it's just your most basic structure. It's, we call it the A to B and B to C closing. So
Hmm.
A to B is the wholesaler and the seller, and B to C is the wholesaler and end buyer. And as you pointed out earlier, a lot of different situations where you use that. One is regulation in different states where, you can't wholesale. Another reason, and this is a popular one, is when you're doing a regular assignment, the assignment fee shows up in your HUD statement. So it's very clear between the seller and the buyer profits are. And in certain situations, that's an uncomfortable scenario to be in. And double closing can prevent that. So you don't have to disclose what your assignment fees are.
Right. And then another reason I think people are using your transactional funding. What about people who may want to, as a flipper, they want to see a higher price than something that makes it, I don't know, some people feel bad about buying something at a what appears to be a greatly inflated price shortly after the first transaction.
Yeah, that's exactly the reason. Yeah, a lot. especially when you're running your figures, right? And we know a lot of flippers in the space. They understand and they do their underwriting. They know where they need to be at. It's more of a psychological, I guess, effect on them to see that that number could be so large, the assignment fee. But as long
Right.
as their numbers work at the end, everybody wins in that situation.
Yeah, very good, very good. Okay, and then how do you choose your title companies for this? Because a lot of title companies are not very accustomed to these sorts of things, and it seems like that's probably one of your greatest risks.
Yeah, exactly. Vetting title companies is among our checklist for both transactions, double closing and EMD. And also, and we can talk about this later, we call it the stack method. We got a lot of different requests and we do this nationwide. So we have to come up with a bit of a robust system to make sure that the title company is truly vetted. And one of the ways we do that is obviously looking online, verifying, calling. We receive wire instructions from 50 different states. So we want to make sure that we're able to have a process in place. And quite simply, what we do for vetting a title company is having that conversation up front to understand what their process is. And if it's aligned with our process, then it's something that we could move forward with. Oftentimes, though, if a title company isn't familiar with the strategy that we're using, we have a list of vetted title companies that we could always refer to the borrower. It's we can either refer them to ours or ask them to see if they can find a different title company to use.
But how do you vet them? How do you know that they're going to understand how the transaction works and not put you in a situation where your money ends up in limbo?
Yep. So we simply ask them, we have a list of questions, and
Mhm.
those questions will reveal whether or not they understand how to perform the transaction. So in a double close, for example, we require B2C funds to be in place first.
Mhm.
And that's a list of questions that we ask. So if we can see that they're struggling with those questions, then we don't feel as comfortable to be able to use that title company, and we will suggest to use a different one.
Right, exactly. So this is really with the double closing, your risk is simply that, that there's some issue with the title company. Essentially, you don't have to underwrite the deal. You're not worried about that. If the mechanics are in place, then your money is safe.
Exactly. Correct. Yeah. The greatest benefit for the double close is that you can actually see the end buyer's funds placed in escrow first.
Hmm.
And once you understand that those are in place, then you can do the A to B transaction. And because they're all happening within the same day, the risk is very low.
Exactly. And then let's back up a little bit and talk about the EMD. So when you provide that, for example, in most cases, that would be, I guess there's a different variety of reasons. I mean, it could be like a fix and flipper, it could be who knows. But there you have a somewhat different issue, right? There the issue is you don't get paid every time. Or let me just back it up and just say, like, how do you get paid on those transactions and how much? How does it all work out?
Yeah. And so the favorite of the three is the double close because it's the same day closing,
Yeah.
not a lot of lead time to the close date. You know, we usually get requests a week, maybe a couple of days prior, and we just do our vetting. Whereas the EMD, that's a bit of different animal. As you know, not all deals will get to the closing table, and even at the closing table, a lot of deals tend to fall apart. So with EMD, the risk there is a deal not following through. One of the biggest risks actually with EMD, and the way we protect it, is making sure we can track the inspection period date. Anything past the inspection period, EMD goes hard. So the easiest and fastest way to lose EMD is to not have an eye on when inspection period ends.
Right. Right. So let's say that you keep your eye on all that and it gets to the closing table, or I'm sorry, let's say it doesn't close. So who pays for that? Because a lot of times, somebody may put their EMD down and then it doesn't close. So do you get paid in those transactions?
In those transactions, the only way we get paid is if the wholesaler also gets paid, and that's through closing. Our return comes from the assignment fee, not based on the assignment fee. It comes from the assignment fee.
Hmm.
So if it doesn't get to the closing table, we don't essentially get a return. There's different tiers for EMD. I personally don't charge an upfront fee. based on the amount. But once you start talking to different wholesalers and the amount exceeds a certain threshold, and just to give you an example, there was one in California that required a $50,000 EMD. And for that period of time, it was about 3 weeks long, right? Their inspection period went for 18 or 19 days. In those situations, I opt to choose to charge a small fee, maybe a 1% fee, just to have the use of those funds. And then hopefully it closes, and then you can get your return at the end when the deal closes.
Right. So then to be clear though, for most of your transactions, then you have to set your fees in such a way that you set your fees essentially probabilistically. So knowing that, X percentage, most of these are not even going to make it to close, then you just have to set your fees such that the ones that do close, you're making up for the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. For me personally, it's a numbers game. What I like to do is I like to work with a lot of different wholesalers and really test the market to see who my good borrowers are. Once I've established a relationship with a wholesaler, I refer to it as having respect for the use of the funds. Once they respect the use of the funds, then I can negotiate a much preferred rate with them, because I understand that they're coming into this with the intent to close, right?
Right.
Not really necessarily using it for long shot deals where they think they may have a chance. So really identifying
sense.
your borrowers are really key.
So up front, you have somebody new walk in, you have to look at that like an insurance company. You have, X based risk. And just like an actuary, then over time you get to know the borrower, you get to know that risk better and get the proper fee. Excellent. Yeah, because I mean, I want to make sure from both perspectives, both the investor as well as I should say the real estate investor as well as lenders, to get the idea of really, how do you get into the business? How do you make it work? And then, of course, since you're having control over the escrow account, you can just yank it, and that's part of your contract, right? You just say, hey, listen, if you can't close this thing by the end of the inspection period, you've got to replace my funds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
all about making sure we have good processes in place and good contracts in place. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I notice one of the other things that you have out on your website at fundmyclose.com, seller carryback financing. So could you explain to us how does that work and what's your role in that?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. It's gained a lot more popularity in the last, I'd say, couple of months or few months. This is really intended for an end buyer, and I've struggled to explain it, but I'll do my best. It's essentially a situation where you have a primary lender and a secondary lender. Your secondary lender is actually the seller itself.
Mhm.
And so you have two obligations, one to the lender and one to the seller. In a general transaction, the primary lender will require all cash to the table. They want to see 100% of the funds brought to the table, closing table. And then you can record the second, which is what the seller will bring. That's the secondary lender.
Right.
Where we come in is really to bring in that down payment and closing costs. So it's almost similar to a double close. We're in the
Mhm.
transaction for a very short period of time, just to get that first part of the transaction closed. Once that's closed, then the seller can come in and record their second, and those funds are returned back to the lender. It's essentially a zero money in strategy for an end buyer. Let me know if I need to re-clarify that. That one's kind of a hard one for me to explain.
Yeah, I got it. Got it. So, okay, I think that's perfect, Justin. So, if I understand correctly, what's happening here is you're lending money to the seller is lending money to the buyer, and then that seller, upon close, when they're made flush, they can pay you right back. So, for you, your money is out for a short period of time. But then that buyer, of course, then has, as you mentioned, two obligations. They've got the primary or the first mortgage, and they're going to be paying back the seller over some number of years.
Yep, that's correct. Yep. So we're in there just to close that first transaction out. As soon as this is closed, we get repaid back from the seller's proceeds. Yeah. And then instead of the buyer recording a note against that, or we recording a note against the buyer, it's the seller recording that note. So
Yeah, exactly. But I love it. I mean, I love all your strategies. First of all, I mean, they're great from the standpoint of the investor, but from your standpoint, your money's not out there for very long. And if you do things right, if you have the proper safeguards, then certainly you can make some great rates. And I don't know unless you want to mention, I was just going to direct people to your website, fundmyclothes.com, and you can see the sort of rates that are charged, the conditions, etc. I'm sure those are subject to change. So probably better that people head out there and get a better understanding of what's going on. So then, since your money isn't out there for very long, actually, this seems like it's even better than gap lending because that gap lender that could be out for 1, 2, 5, 6 months, who knows, depending on the situation.
yeah, and I actually used to do a bit of gap lending prior to this, and my focus has shifted. A couple of reasons for that. One is the length of time, right? Even though it has a maturity date, doesn't mean it's going to be returned on that date.
That's why I
Uh,
said 6 months or anything. Yeah, I know the gap lenders have a lot of trouble sometimes because, I mean, consider first you can't close your transaction, and then second of all, you're counting on somebody then to backfill it, and then heaven knows what if things aren't going well, heaven forbid.
yeah,
And then
it
who's going to want to put additional money in because of course you have to keep investors up to date, and I could see how this gap lending goes sideways very easily.
yeah, yeah. Gap, you're vetting the deal and the borrower, whereas in
Yes,
transactional, you don't need to do any of that. So that's another powerful advantage when
that
doing
is
that.
very powerful. Just focus on the mechanics. But then, of
Mhm.
course, I have to ask, why isn't everyone doing this? You're making better money in the banks, but man, you're really working for it.
Yeah, so Gap has the better opportunity for more passive role,
Mhm.
whereas in transactional, it's a very active role. So the competition is higher in that space, and it's a very niche space. So it really depends on volume.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, definitely a lot of churn. So you're always out there looking for new people that need the EMD, et cetera. Churn, churn, churn. And just in case it isn't completely obvious to everybody, it's all about timing, all the time value of money. Well, just I mentioned probabilistically, you have to set your rates, which actually I think rates is not the correct word. Really, it's more like points, correct? Yeah. To summarize, then, you've really got two very important things that you got to consider: the probability of closing and then the time value of money. So how long is it out there? And for most cases, not very long at all. It's committed and then close the transaction. So I'd love to talk about the legal aspect as well, because that's obviously someplace where you can go very wrong as a lender. So what was the process that you went through to get all of your contracts in order?
Yeah, actually, and you touched upon this earlier. The greatest difficulty we have is really with title companies.
Mhm.
And I'm fortunate to be part of the community that has done several of these deals, several hundreds of these deals. So through that, there's a lot of learnings or lessons learned that we've come. And it all really depends on the title company. Just to give you a couple of examples, within our contract, that's where we got, that very limited power of attorney to cancel or have the right to cancel on behalf of the borrower. Oftentimes, wholesalers will disappear on you. They won't be responsive, and it's the day
Yep.
of. Another portion of it is the other fight you're having is with the title company to return your EMD. Certain states are mutual release states where others aren't. And what we found though is that it's really title dependent. Title has their own internal process that they follow. And so what we've done is said, you know what, every deal is just going to have a mutual release from now on. So we can skip that conversation. And then the other most important part is
So mutual
make,
release, let's make sure we're all on the same page for that.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, mutual release is just making sure if in the event that we need to cancel, both
Mhm.
buyer and seller agree to release those funds back to where the source, right? So we're having that conversation up front with title to say, do you see all the contracts we've provided? Do you, and do you agree with all the steps that we have? And then on the larger deals, what I personally do is we actually make title party to the contracts and say,
Mhm.
title, understand that you've read the agreements, you've understand it, and you agree to follow it. And so, you know, that one has a lot of friction. And so it's really dependent on the lender, whether or not they want to use that particular document. But from those, that's where our contracts have come from. It's really from lessons learned and past experiences.
So what about coaching? Do you help people with this? Do you have any students?
I personally don't. I belong to a community that does, you know, we all help each other, we all learn from each
Nice.
other. And that's, you know, I can mention it too. That's
Yeah, I would love it.
uh Fun to Freedom is the community that I'm part of.
Good stuff. Yeah. I mean, this is real gold, Justin. I mean, knowing how to execute these different types of loans, really cool. And yeah, thanks for the legal aspect too, because I could only imagine the sort of issues. So cool. Well, what about your edge? How do you get an edge over your competitors?
Yeah, so currently right now, my personal focus is speed, especially with EMD, not so much with double closing and the other ones, but when a borrower comes to you, it's usually, hey, I need it by yesterday. They're
Of
always late to
course.
the party, right? Yeah, because you know, it's a short window of time you have to deposit EMD. And so a couple things that we're doing right now, we're leveraging AI and automations. So it's, you know, one of our automations is constant communication of where we are in the step and in the phase for that process. And then for AI, we're actually using the tools we have available to read contracts to give us a good idea or clear idea. Because you can see, I mean, some contracts are 10 pages long. And, you know, to try to get all the information or the root of the
Right.
information can take some time.
Oh yeah,
So,
it's fun. I mean, I remember last time that I had an AI summary of a contract. It was pretty cool. It came directly from my PDF program. And I think that,
mhm.
as I remember, what it had was right, but it didn't really have any of the nuances. There was a lot more to it.
Yeah. Yeah. For us, you know, always verify, right? Trust but verify.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good stuff. Good stuff. And clearly you've figured out a lot of the speed bumps there, getting the title company, for example, the legal end, getting them to be a party to the contract, making sure that they're actually on board with returning your funds according to their internal procedures, etc. Finding greater ways to integrate AI and technology to speed. Oh, actually, that's one of the things we didn't talk about in detail. You must have tons of deadlines. Like I could only imagine. I thought my calendar was a disaster, but you must have stuff firing all the time, like that you got to yank this EMD or such. How do you handle all that? Do you have like a lot of assistants or just very organized?
So that's one of the best parts of handling it with automation.
Mhm.
We use a CRM to track all our deal flows, so we know
Right.
where they are and what process they're in. So if we're tracking an inspection date, you know, we get notifications, us and the borrower, 48 hours ahead of the
Mhm.
inspection period saying, we're almost there. What are we going to do? Are we going to cancel, extend? You know, let's come up with a game plan.
Right. Got it. Okay. Good stuff. I don't know if you're open to talking about this, but you mentioned to me one day, like you're flying out the next day and you had like three contracts that either cancel or that replace the MD, et cetera. So what is that like? Is it exhilarating or is that just get hairy at times?
I mean, it can get hairy. Yeah, I think that was on me for I like to give the borrower the benefit of the doubt and as much time as possible. But I think over time, in order to streamline in any business, you have to come up with very clear guidelines. And that's probably something I'm going to change within my own business is making sure I give myself a little bit of ample time. But, you know, it definitely can be a challenge when you have, you know, a wire due that day and you're rushing to get email responses back and the wire cutoff is, you know, 4 o'clock or 4:30. So
Right. Well, any mistakes that you see people in the business doing right now, or ways in which you would feel that you're a bit of a contrarian?
I would say, because I do see, like I said, you know, the competition is definitely there, especially for EMD, but that's the most difficult one out of all three. I would caution anybody you know, just jumping into that business without fully understanding the process of it. I leverage my experience because I've been a borrower, I've been a buyer, I've employed, you know, the BRRRR strategy. So I know what that process looks like. Someone who's just getting into the lending space, if you don't really truly understand that process, it's easy to get burned. So if you are interested, you know, I would encourage someone to partner up with someone that understands this space or someone with experience.
Yeah, makes sense. And then you also gave us that resource. I think I may join, I want to join that group. It sounds like sort of people that I need to work with as I grow as a lender. But with that, I think probably a good time to head into our lightning round. You ready?
Okay. All right.
All right. If you could be known for just one thing, what would it be?
I'd say being a good person.
What personal character has been most pivotal to your success?
I would say being, you know, observant, listening. I tend to follow what other people are doing, what works for them.
All right. What was one mistake that has taught you the most?
Not having good contracts.
Okay, yeah. Wow. Um,
Yeah.
and how about this? How about a random question? That's kind of weighty. This one will probably be very light. Just tell me when to stop cutting.
And stop.
Oh, wow. Which historical sporting event would you like to witness?
Historical sporting event? I what's considered historical?
I
Maybe
don't
you know
know.
the
Any
Olympic
famous
stuff?
cricket game that you just have to see? I don't. I'm
Yeah,
thinking for
I
me, it
mean
would be like the Roman chariot races. Maybe it's Ben
exactly,
Hur.
yeah. Yeah. So, you know, when they had the original Olympics back, you know, I guess when it was back in the Greek, is it Greek era
Yeah.
they had that? Yeah, something like that. Probably one of those sports. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just think I probably wouldn't want to watch the wrestling. Anyway, never
No.
mind. Bad joke. Okay, can you give us a tip or trick that investors can implement in their business today?
Oh, I would say and I'm still learning to do this, to learn how to block your calendar, to manage your calendar, you know. Really focus on what's important and make sure you make time for it.
Uh, can you hit us with a book recommendation? What's one book that every investor should read?
I'm not the right person to ask that, but maybe your book to start.
Okay, all right, great. See, I didn't even pay Justin to say that, but here you go. Passionate Living Through Passive Investing, George Roberts III. Please check it out. Same as the name of the podcast. And can you set us out with a quote?
I don't know any good quotes.
All right, awesome. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with our audience. Just want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to reach out to you. What's the best way to get in touch with Justin Pilakka?
Yeah, the best way is you know, through the website that you mentioned, fundmyclothes.com.
Mhm.
You can just shoot me an email and I'll happily respond.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, George. Thanks for having me.